Bob Coleman had a question. Okay, that was Bob's question. I hope I was able to answer that for you.
We have another question. It says, does your systems integrate with Great Plains?
Yes, so that's another great question. So let's talk about integration in general, and then let's talk about Great Plains. I think there are really two questions that we could break out of that. So one of the things that perhaps we didn't touch on in here, that you could go back to that image of the ecosystem where you had the CMS in the center, and then you had the various bubbles of different other platforms that are kind of a hub and spoke diagram, if you will, around the ecosystem. You know, Great Plains as a general purpose accounting platform could also plug in as one of those purpose-specific platforms, much like eCommerce, much like some of the other purpose-specific platforms. And so the answer is, if, for instance, you are looking to do a digital platform selection, and Great Plains is an existing platform within your ecosystem, you know it's not going to change, then you would look to understand what are the integration requirements for Great Plains and roll that into the overall requirement for your platform selection. So in terms of whether our solution integrates with Great Plains, we actually work with a variety of different platforms, not just one. And if we were working with you, that would be one of the requirements that we would look at. And when we work with the vendors and interrogate them, per se, we would ask them how we would do that integration, what technical facilities are there that allow us to move information between Great Plains and perhaps the CMS or perhaps the e-commerce system. Are there any other questions?
We had a hand raised from the audience. Sarah, you may ask a question now, please. Okay, so till the time we get the question from Sarah, we can take another question, which is about the pricing. What is the general pricing for the selection process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as with anything, as if you're buying a house or a car, it really depends on how big that's going to be. Same thing with something like a selection process. With the selection process, we look at several things. One, it's going to be dependent on how many platforms might be involved, how many stakeholders might be involved. We find that as we work in larger and larger organizations, the number of stakeholders that we need to engage with and also the time it takes to engage with stakeholders increases. So all of that has a bearing on the cost of the engagement. But typically engagements can last anywhere from a few weeks if we're just working with a small team, focusing on a few on a single platform, to multiple weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, if we're focusing on a large organization, multiple platforms. So it could be anywhere from, you know, $10,000 on up to well over $100,000, depending on the level of work that's required.
Next question is, how long does the selection process take?
Well, again, it goes back to the question around pricing, and that's a dependency around, again, those two key elements. The complexity of the organizational structure and the number of stakeholders or groups of stakeholders that we would need to engage with. And then, of course, the platforms themselves, how many. You know, another thing to look at is we're doing work with a customer now where they're also comparing internal incumbent platforms, in other words, platforms that they already have in place, with potential up against new platforms to see if they want to replace the internal platforms with new platforms or they want to keep them. So if we go through that option grid as we had before, we're actually going to spend time and plug in some of their old platforms and see if it makes sense to keep those. So all of these type of things also contribute to the overall complexity of the selection process and can drive the time as well. Any other questions, Kamia?
Yes, we have a question. It says, what is the best way to approach the vendor demo?
That's a great question. The vendor demo, I may have touched on it shortly, but I can get into a bit more detail. Definitely vendor demos need to have a directed component to them, and then a component that enables the vendor to show off what they believe is differentiating about their platform. So in this case, a directed demo is one in which you will have taken requirements, you will have taken use scenarios or user stories, resolve them into a script that you want them to follow in the demo. So as I may have mentioned, demos typically are anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in length. And in that time, anywhere from an hour to maybe 2 hours can be dedicated to the directed demo, where the vendor is focused on making sure that they go through the specific scenarios that you've outlined for them. And that as the stakeholders are sitting there, they have the opportunity to not only see that, but also ask questions. Why did you do it this way? Can I do it that way? So it's ideally set up in a very interactive manner based on things that the stakeholders are already familiar with from a day-to-day basis, the work they do. The second part of the demo, which can be shorter, allows the vendor to show how they differentiate themselves. Maybe it's a CMS that says, we've got the world's greatest marketing engine that's bundled with our CMS. Let us show you how great this is and how this can keep you from having to buy marketing automation. It may or may not, but it's good to see. So let them do their dog and pony show and let them have that opportunity, because in many cases you might find things that you would not have known about had you not asked them to show their latest and greatest. Any other questions?
Yes, I have. There's one last question that says, how should we build our initial vendor list?
That's a great question. So the initial vendor list can actually be pulled together in a lot of different ways. Of course, for ourselves, being consultants, doing this regularly, we also have relationships with a variety of vendors. We talk to them. We want to understand their products. We do that on a regular basis. So that's one of the values that a consultancy can provide in this equation, because we have people working with those products and just evaluating them ourselves. The second thing is, if you're looking to put a vendor list together yourself, there's a variety of resources out there around CMS, everything from CMS Wire to being able to find those downloadable Gartner as well as Forrester reports. And then on the open source community, which isn't typically followed as closely by those analysts, there's a lot of great resources there, everything from blogs where people have already said, hey, ask the question, what are the top X number of platforms you would look at? Let other people tell you what they think and start reading about it and engaging with those people. So it's a great opportunity. Around some of the other platforms outside of CMS, finally, there are some emerging sites. There are some analysts that focus on things, particularly on the social platforms that aren't as common and that may not initially be followed by some of the bigger analysts. So there are those sites available that you would just, again, Google and find and begin to dig into. Any other questions, Kamia?
No, we've covered all the questions.
Great.
So at this point, we'll go ahead and close the webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Again, feel free to reach out to us. Should you have any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer those. And I hope you all have a wonderful day wherever you're calling in from. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.